What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
Jeff, it is so good to talk to a fellow Ohioan, man. You grew up just down the street from me in Cincinnati while I'm here in Dayton. So good to see you, man.
Good to see you, Ryan. I love Cincinnati. It's my home and it always will be. And I have so many friends there and it's just a great place. So it's great to be with you.
Part of the reason or maybe the reason you lived there and grew up there was because of your dad. And that's where I want to start, because you had told me, and this I think applies to me and a lot of people listening, was you're raised by your dad, Joe, your mother, Donna. And you said, I remember when my dad had a great boss. He was motivated. And when he had a lousy boss, he was neither challenged nor happy. The worst kind of boss, he always used to say, was one who criticized all day long but never offered solutions. And I loved reading the parts about you and your dad and your relationship growing up, and why you probably went to GE, given he was a lifer as well. Can you share more about your upbringing and perhaps your parents and some of the key learnings that you picked up from them?
Yeah, Ryan. So I had the benefit of having really great parents. They were, kind of depression children. So they never took things for granted and they were always problem solvers. My mom was a teacher and my dad, really did his work at GE. I would say, my life was the intersection between math and team sports. Right. So if you said what two things kind of came together, I loved math. I loved problem solving and figuring stuff out, and has stayed with me my whole career. And then I was really an athlete. I played football, baseball, basketball. I had a great experience in all three in Cincinnati and made me really kind of those two things kind of set me on my way. I think, all the time that I was responsible for GE, I would always, when I would be teaching, I would always tell our frontline managers that to the people who work here, they're more important than I am. That basically the frontline leadership of the company, that's who people see every day. And I might be an abstraction, you're a name they know, but they see every day the people on the front lines. And that's why they're very important culture carriers. They're very important for operations. And I always ran the place with a sense that they were the most important people in the company. And a lot of that came from, the way I was raised. A mix in, I have a daughter who's 34. She always had internships when she was going to college that were kind of like office and fancy. I worked in a Ford assembly line when I was going to college. So, in those days, there were no internships. Your internship was hourly work. And I can't tell you how much I got out of that, Ryan, even in my later days. I always had a good relationship with the union leaders. I always identified with how they viewed their life and their role. And a lot of that came from, again, the way I was raised, which was do work, be a good worker, no matter what it was, mowing grass or working in a factory or doing my work professionally. That was always the number one thing.
You mentioned you played sports. You played the same three sports I played in high school, and you played the same sport in college that I played. So we have some uncommon commonalities. I graduated from Ohio University, where I played
Yep.
in the MAC. You went to Dartmouth before going to graduate school at Harvard. And there are two people, though, at Dartmouth that I want to talk about that you've written a lot about. Can you, and I'll just set the stage and then let you tell the story. Can you tell me about Harry Wilson and Reggie Williams?
Yeah, no, definitely. Both good friends of mine, both great guys. Reggie Williams was a linebacker from Michigan, Flint, Michigan. He went on to play 13 years for the Bengals. And, when I was 18 years old and went away to school, he was the best athlete I'd ever seen. In other words, he was physically gifted. He was a hard hitter. He was a state champion wrestler and really a super guy. And I remember telling the story in the book, Ryan, where we were struggling as a team. You know, we were like 500. We should have been better. And we had a team meeting, and the second string quarterback stood up, and Reggie was the captain. And he said, you know what, Reggie, the problem's you, right? And I thought, oh my God, this is courage in action. And you know, we had it out, and you know, I'll never forget that day as long as I live. I talk a little bit about in the book.
Yep. They had the courage. Somebody had the courage, like backup quarterbacks, the guy not even playing, to stand up and say, the problem is you. Our best player, our most athletic person, our best player is you. That's our problem.
When the best player is not caring about the team, nobody else will get in line.
Mm-hmm.
And he was right. And I think Reggie even knew that he was right, but it showed me the power of being willing to stand apart. And that stayed with me really my whole life. Harry grew up in Virginia. His dad was a college president. And there were three Wilson brothers that all went to Dartmouth. One was a running back. Harry was a wide receiver. Harry had the best hands, was a smooth, all Ivy, also played baseball, played center field in baseball. And you know what happens when you graduate, you kind of lose touch with people. But I stayed, let's say, connected with Harry. There was another friend of mine named Jimmy Lee Solomon. He and I were really great friends. And he was good friends with Harry. So I stayed in touch with him over the years. And Jimmy used to say to me, you know, like, he's got a kid that really is an athlete, you know, and I put it away. And then I saw Russell Wilson for the first time when he got drafted, and he looks just like his dad, right? And so every time you see Russell speak on TV and talk about the team, you hear his dad's voice, you know, just the character and the class and the competitiveness. So yeah, I had two really great pals that ended up doing great things.
What did you learn from the sporting fields that you then took into the business world? So you have this great, I think I played quarterback and brought some of those skills into the business world that were helpful. Did not have the math skill that you developed, and still don't. Getting my MBA was very hard, especially the accounting class and finance. Struggled.
Hard for me too. Yeah.
Yes, but I'm curious, what did you take from your alignment too? Like, you have to be smart, and you never get any of the credit, and you deserve just about all of it. So I'm curious what you took from the field as then you progressed into a career, and you started essentially as kind of a frontline guy. Yeah. You didn't just get hired as the CEO. It took a long time to get there. So what are some of the things you took from the field into the business world that helped you?
I'll give you some, Ryan, that maybe people don't talk about a lot. I'd say the importance of peer relationships. You know, in other words, teams are really self-policing. You know, you have a coach, and the coach tells you what to do, but you really police yourself, particularly on an offensive line. So I learned the importance of peer relationships. You know, I learned that failure is not definitive. You know, in other words, like the night after a football game, I didn't remember the good blocks. I remembered like the ones I missed. And you kind of get a sense that you can survive failure. And the last one is, look, think about the next play, right? Whatever happened in the past really doesn't matter. Always think about the next play. So I think those are the things that are really always top of mind for me about being an offensive lineman and being a football player, and the experiences I had.
We won't go in perfect order, but we'll go in some semblance of an order, Jeff, with your career. So you get done playing, and I want to fast forward a little bit to where you have a job at GE and you get moved to Texas. I believe you're a sales manager role.
Yeah, sales manager.
Sales manager role. And I want to go personal before we go business. And somebody catches your eye. And the reason, again, because I think we also have this in common, is I also met my wife at work. I also was in a leadership position. She was not at the time. Didn't work for me. It was, but was in a different part of the business. She also was maybe the number one sales professional in our division at the time. And I believe Andy was at least that or close to that. And so to me, I know I'm personally extremely attracted to excellence and to people who are performers and produce and they get it done and they got the brains and the work ethic. I don't know. I feel like as I was reading about this, that we have this in common, because it sounds like Andy was just a stud sales performer, and that was part of the attraction there.
Yeah, look, we actually had booth duty together. That was kind of how we met at a trade show, and it was hard for her to keep in a career because of my position and things like that. So she decided to retire. But I'm lucky, Ryan, in my life that my mother was a strong woman and my wife is a strong woman. And I think, so I had two role models all the time that, as I began a career where I had women working for me or could, do things for their career or try to help them, I had really excellent, kind of role models about how to treat people and giving people a fair chance and all those things. And so, yeah, for sure that matters. And it also is helpful, like when you lead an intense life, that your partner has perspective on what you're doing and can give it context and things like that. So yeah, no, that was really fortunate. And we've been married now 35 years. So, something's worked.
I love it. There was, I want you to tell the story. So, there was you could, if your boss was willing to invest, you could, I believe it was $45,000 in a Mexican plant that you wanted to build. Can you tell that story? Because I think the reason I want to bring this up, Jeff, is because I think it's important. I found people who sustain excellence have a bias for action.
Yeah.
They can see a problem and a solution, and they have the guts and the willingness to ask for some sort of investment, and they go and get it done. And I think this is this story that I hope you can share.
No, I think it's a great lesson for your listeners.
Yeah.
I think, Ryan, because I always tell young managers, look, the best people get 100% of the work done in 80% of the time. So they always leave an extra amount to do something that's extra. And they're always willing to push the envelopes to get things done. So I was a sales manager, and there was very beginning of companies moving factories into northern Mexico. And I went to El Paso and said, gosh, if only we had local capability, a local warehouse, so that we could service these customers, we'd never lose an order. So my boss came to town. We flew to El Paso. I had like a little business plan. I had like a 2-page business plan. I said, look, if you give me $45,000, I can rent a warehouse, and I guarantee you we'll get $7 million more in revenue, blah, 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 right? So he said, look, I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea, but because you asked for it, I'm going to let you do it. He said, like, I just like people that ask for things, kind of what you said. And we did it, and it worked. And, those kinds of decisions are the things that bring you up in your career and allow you to stand out in a pack, right? If everybody needs you to do just your job, that's key. But I think your bosses want to see you do more than your job, and that's also really important.
Okay. You progress through your career. You're making a series of those types of ask, and you're I think you just have this bias for action, and that is why you progress quickly in your career at GE. And I know we're skipping some steps, but ultimately it gets to the point where the legendary Jack Welch says he's going to retire at some point. And then at one point they name 3 potential successors, which seems like a bizarre way to go about this. And they said the 2 who don't get it must leave the company. Again, it's like Survivor, but with the world's biggest and best company at the time. What was that like in that moment when they name you 3 guys, and that you're gonna succeed this Titan who was named, I believe, the greatest manager of the century?
Yeah, so true. Yeah. So,
Take us inside the moment of what's going through your mind when they name the 3 of you. We'll dig into some of the specifics as well, but what's going on at that point?
yeah, so I think people kind of knew where the timing was from the extent of Jack retiring. There were three of us who we all knew each other. We'd all worked together for a long time. I think it was just so much more public than anything I was used to. So they named the three of us as potential successors, which, you know, I had never been in the newspaper before. My family wasn't used to it. It just was like too much too quickly. And then over the next couple of weeks, I was at headquarters, and Jack said, "Look, I need to spend 30 minutes with you." So I said, "Hey, great, come in." And we sat down, and he said, "I just want you to know that if you don't get the job, you've got to leave. You've got to leave." And I said, "You're kidding." You know, I was 45 years old. I had only worked at the company. I liked the company. I even liked Jim and Bob, you know. And he says, "No, you got to go." And I said, "Okay." And to be honest with you, I didn't even tell my wife. I didn't want to, I think she would have just been like freaked out. So I just kind of held it inside and said, "Look," and then maybe a couple of weeks after that, I said, "You know, I met with Jack a couple of weeks ago, and, you know, if I don't get the job, you and I are going to have to leave," which in her world, practical world, wasn't so much me leaving GE. It would mean probably a move. You know, we had a young daughter at the time. So that's, you know, I think my Andy was very practical about it. So, and then it just was so public. It went on for so long. And it just was an uncomfortable feeling, let's say.
Why do you think he picked you?
You know, I get asked that a lot. You never really know the answer. I think it goes back to some of the questions you asked earlier, Ryan, which was, I was a good peer, you know. I think I had really strong peer connections and relationships. And I always say in most companies, your peers promote you. You know, your boss kind of has to like you, and the people that work for you kind of have to like you. But your peer relationships, those are free. Those have to be earned. And I think that's what people can recognize. So when I would go into a business review or kind of review a team, I would always watch the body language as somebody was speaking and see what other people really were thinking and feeling. And I think that had something to do with it.
So I've heard that Jack has run these legendary QBRs, quarterly business reviews, and a lot of other people have implemented them, including where I worked, a place called LexisNexis. And these were events. I mean, big moments. And as a mid-level manager, when I was a regional sales manager and then a director and then a VP, I remember preparing like crazy for these QBRs because I wanted to, one, kind of have the back of my team and show them that my team was awesome, the people on my team, but also that I viewed it as an opportunity to show that I know my stuff. What were the QBRs like when you were working for Jack? Because I know there were moments where he basically told you he was going to fire you, that where you struggled at times, but then there obviously had to be other ones where he loved you because he ended up picking you to be his successor. So what were those QBRs like with him? And then I would be curious too, what were they like with you when you were in charge?
Yeah, you know, Ryan, I would say like a lot of stuff gets written about Jack, and he was tough for sure, but he was inspirational. I never was like afraid of him or never felt like he asked anything. You know, he was a screamer, you know, and that sometimes sends people. You probably have football coaches that are like that.
For sure. I mean, almost all of them, in fact.
And sometimes people would confuse his tone of voice actually with what he was asking and what. And I think that basically what he looked for is he wanted you to be prepared, but he enjoyed spontaneity, right? He never stayed to the script. So you might have a 20-page presentation, you know all 20 pages really well, and he would just say, he would go to page 7, then page 17, and then spend 30 minutes talking about something else. And I think he used that as a way to really see, you know, the people that actually know their business don't need to be scripted that much, you know? So I'll tell you a story. Like one of the jobs that put me on my career was fixing compressors and refrigerators. And this was a big product recall, and it took place, let's say 1989. And it was brutal. This was the biggest product recall in the history of the company. And we were going monthly to the GE boardroom, and it was all about costing the company money. And it was brutal. We got yelled at every time, right? So we had to go one time and say, look, Jack, we underestimated the reserve. And instead of $400 million, it's really got to be $500 million. And he went ripshit, okay? And he goes after me. And the good news was I had actually gone out in the field to repair compressors. So I went out like every other week. I would do a tech ride, and I would go into people's home with a uniform on and sit down and fix compressor. I was horrible, by the way. So I needed.
What was your title at the time?
I was vice president of consumer service.
So you had a big up job, but you're going doing like a tech.
But it saved my ass, really, really, Ryan. You know, in other words, when it came to this meeting, I could explain to the boss actually why the repair cost more. And he was saying, well, why does it take 105 minutes? I said, well, look, here's the prep, here's this, here's that. So for like 30 minutes, it was one-on-one describing how the repair takes place, right? That helped me. That's how you survive. It's not so much like what was in the presentation. It was kind of like he could get a sense that I was hands-on, that I knew my stuff, and that I was willing to defend what the answer was, not just throwing other people under the bus. And I think that's critical for your listeners.
It's having a frontline obsession. I remember Chris Zook talked about this. And one of my all-time favorite bosses, a guy named Brian Miller, he was high up, but he never forgot how to carry a bag. When I'm, you know, for a sales guy, right, you go and carry a bag. He never forgot because he always did it. Like he made sure that it was a part of his regular routine was to go on sales calls, even though he had ascended into these very high roles. And I think it's a good reminder for all of us as we ascend in our career to bigger titles and bigger roles where the job is different. You got to manage up, you got to present to the board, you have Jack Welch. But to remember that Jeff Immelt even went in and fixed a refrigerator or a compressor, and because of that, that is why you were able to present so well when dealing with problems.
Exactly. And I would also say, I think no matter how high up you get in an organization, you need to have a passion for watching how people work. You know, in other words, I liked watching people in their natural setting and ask them how they did their job, whether they were a sales leader, a factory manager, a service technician. And I think good leaders are good students of work, right? Because that gives you a perspective of what it feels like, what tools work, what things don't work. And that's important.
One of the things you wrote in chapter 2 is I'd always believed an important determinant of success could be found in how one answered 3 questions. Those questions: how fast can you learn? How much can you take? And what will you give to those around you? Can you expand on that and the importance? Because the title of that chapter is Leaders Learn Every Day. You can imagine why that jumped out at me when I was looking through the book, but the importance of those questions and being able to answer them as a leader.
Yeah, you know, so careers are not built in a straight line. They're built through ups and downs and learning every day. And I always tell people, you know, how fast you can learn, because you never get hired for what you know, because the world changes too. And I would say particularly today, the world just changes too quickly. So you don't get hired for what you know, you get hired for how fast you can learn, right? How much can you take? You know, my favorite philosopher is Mike Tyson. Like, everybody has a strategy till they get punched in the nose. And that's the way life is. Like, you're gonna, and I would say with many of your listeners, right, your raw intelligence isn't gonna limit you. Ultimately, what's gonna limit you in your journey is, do you really want to take the heat? You know, do you really want to go for it? Are you willing to make the sacrifices? Are you willing to keep learning? So that's how much you can take, and then how much you can give to others. You know, it's tough to take this journey by yourself. It's tough to take this journey. You know, business itself is really boring unless people are involved, right? It's what the people part is what makes it interesting and fun and challenging. So, I think telling these people, I teach now a business school class, and I go through this at the end of every class. So I do this on the last session of every class. I go through the 3 questions, and I basically look around the room and say, look, any one of you could be the president of GE or JP Morgan or Kroger's, or you go down the list. You can't. But most of you will choose not to. Most of you will kind of opt out. And I just think that's true about life, about business careers anyhow.
Your first day, your luck is amazing, by the way. Your first day as CEO of GE was September 10th, 2001. So everybody go back slowly, think about what you were doing on September 10th, 2001, and then think about the next day, the tragedy for those of us, especially who are listening in America. And you introduce yourself. There's 300,000 employees. You're excited. I believe you said you flew to Seattle. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you're all ready to go. Things are good. You're Jack's successor. Here we go. And then the next morning you wake up. You're on the West Coast. The tragedy happened here on the East Coast. What was that second day as CEO like for you?
Oh, it was a gut punch on a number of different levels. What happened to our country? 2 of our employees died, so it was a gut punch. It had a massive impact on our businesses. Down in Cincinnati, the aircraft engines business, the insurance business, even the media business were all impacted. And I'd say that the third thing, Ryan, is it really set in a new era in the US of volatility, of geopolitical risk, of tail risk events. I had never seen a tail risk event until 9/11. So kind of a new era of risk and risk management. So all those things were, and so I was just going by instinct, right? You just kind of go by instinct and kind of take problems as they come. And I always think in a crisis, particularly like COVID or 9/11, good leaders absorb fear. They don't they don't make people around them afraid for no reason. So it doesn't mean that you need to blow smoke, but you need to give people a plan to make progress. I think good leaders hold 2 truths at the same time, right? That the worst can happen and the best can happen, and they don't close their eyes to opportunities that may arise as they go through the process. And good leaders are good communicators. And by communication, I mean keeping people contemporary, but also be willing to say, I don't know, that here's what I know right now. I'll be smarter tomorrow. I'll let you know again tomorrow. And those things all came to the fore as I stood there after 9/11.
By the end of your first week, GE shares dropped 20%, decreasing the company's market cap by $80 billion. What is going through the mind of Jeff Immelt at that time? 80 billion, and you're saying, I didn't do anything. I mean, what's like in your private conversations are you saying and thinking at that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I cared about it or that I looked at it, right? You have to, and you must.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew at that moment there was nothing I could really do about it. That basically my priority was to save the company or to preserve our aviation business, and that's really where I put the most attention. So I think in a crisis you have to prioritize those things that are really, you have to be very clear about those things that you can control, those things that matter, and put your focus on them.
Yeah. I want to talk about, I may pronounce his name wrong. Omar Ishrak.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Omar.
Okay. You said in your career, you meet only a handful of leaders who have the trifecta of being able to innovate, execute, and develop talent. I love that trifecta. Can you expand more on both Omar as well as why that's critical for leaders?
Look, I think we trivialize sometimes leadership to assume that everybody can do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And not only is that impossible, but it's not actually what you want if you're building a company. And I would always look at people to say, we had thousands of good operators, people that could execute, people that knew drills. In Cincinnati, Ryan, she's retired now, but there's a woman named Colleen Athens. She probably had 30,000 people working for her in the aviation supply chain. She was the manufacturing VP for aviation. She was an amazing operator, amazing, right? She knew the details and the metrics and the people and all that stuff. And then there's people that are kind of like really creative and good innovators. I know that you did one of these sessions with Beth Comstock. Beth Comstock is an innovator. She's creative. She's a different thinker. She's sees what's next. She's awesome, right? And then you have people that are excellent with people, that are magnets for talent, know how to recruit. There was a guy named Dan Heintzelman that also spent time in aviation, but he was the company's best trainer. He was a vice chairman when he retired, but he could recruit and train people really excellently. So that's the three pillars, let's say. And then there's people that can do them all, right? And so Omar Ishrak was somebody I brought in to run the ultrasound business. He was a great leader for a long time, then became CEO of Medtronics. And Omar was creative. He knew where markets would go. He was very focused, right? He was an excellent operator because he knew how to distill things down to 2 or 3 critical paths. And he was a beacon for talent because he knew how to empower people to let them do their best work. And maybe I saw 10 of those people over my whole career, not just when I was CEO, that really were 3-sport athletes, triathletes. And it's rare when you see it.
When you're teaching these courses at Stanford, I have to imagine if I was in the class, I would say, well, I want to be like Omar. Can you teach me? Can you teach me? Is that something like, I know I don't want, it's not quite the nature versus nurture question, but in a way it is like, how can somebody develop the skill to be like Omar?
It's a great question, because I do talk about it in my class. But what I basically say, Ryan, is, okay, it's really hard to train yourself to be this. But as you leave school, you have to be good at one of those 3. In other words, you better either be a good operator, you better be a creative talent, or you better be a beacon for talent, because you can't progress in your career and not be good at any one of the 3. So my advice to them is, make sure you're good at one, and then give yourself the experiences and the self-confidence through your career path and who you work for and what you learn that give you a chance to be good at the other 2. And some of that is exposure, some of that is training, some of that's experience, and just give yourself that kind of chance.
You said when writing your book, I believe this is in the acknowledgement, you said the acknowledgement section, one of the things you learned is you have to really get it helps you gain clarity, which I think writing in general does. That's why all leaders should be writing every day, but writing in general can help create clarity. And one of the things you had to learn about was your strengths and weaknesses. When you think about that trifecta, did you have all 3? Do you have all 3?
Not all the time. I would say I naturally had creativity and people skills.
Mm-hmm.
I had to supplement myself with good operators, right? So my CFO, Keith Sharon, he was a great operator. Dave Joyce, who runs aviation business in Cincinnati, he was a great operator. So I think it's also important to be self-aware and know that you aren't always the best at all 3, but you still need to get all 3 done. Mm-hmm. And fortunately at GE, we had a lot of good operators. I would say where companies tend to fall down is they don't have enough innovation. Mm-hmm. I actually think a lot of people have good operators, but not enough companies have good on the innovation side.
Well, speaking of going in the wrong direction, I mean, part of what happened at GE is it went backwards as far as it didn't grow over the course of your time. And we could talk for days and days about the why behind that. Was innovation part of it? What were some of the high level, if you zoomed out and had to say, okay, here are a few of the things, because it felt to me as I'm learning more about this, that I don't want to say it was a house of cards that Jack left you, but in some cases with the financial aspect of it that I didn't even completely understand as I'm digging into that, there were parts of it that were just almost a ticking time bomb that were going to explode at some point. So what were some of the keys that led to the company once you took over, not only not growing, but going in the opposite direction?
Ryan, again, one of the reasons why I wrote the book is I wanted to get a complete story
right
about the company itself, really. And the second thing is that we lived through many tail risk events and many crises, and I wanted to give the reader a sense of how you traverse those things, right? So look, Jack was a great leader, but the world changed. The world, I would say the company I grew up in was process intense and very financially driven. And the world became more global and more technical and more diverse. And those are the shifts that we needed to make and that we tried to make. I think on the positive side of the ledger, look, we generated lots of earnings and cash while I was CEO. We had really good businesses. We had good people, good initiatives. But, really kind of unwinding GE Capital was really a challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's on me, right? I take responsibility for that. I don't blame anybody but myself. But, the GE story is a complicated one,
Mm-hmm.
and I want it to be told more fully.
One of the criticisms about you that I talked to Beth Comstock about on this podcast was this phrase called success theater.
Yeah.
And Beth had basically was written that you said, don't bring me any of these issues, like, so people only brought you good news. And she said, actually, it was the opposite of that. So I don't know how that became a narrative. In my experience with Jeff, he in hers as a leader, we wanted that brought to us, but this narrative got creative that Jeff only likes this success theater. What is your response when you saw some of that criticism about you?
Yeah, Ryan, from 2010 through 2017, 10 times a year, I would have a senior leader fly to my home. We would have dinner as a couple with they and their spouse on a Friday night. And I would spend 5 or 6 hours with them one-on-one on a Saturday morning. And the whole goal of this was to say, tell me something I don't know. Tell me about your business. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your career. What do you like about GE? What don't you like? What do you think I can do better? And it was an unplugged session for 5 or 6 hours. I did that for 7 years.
Wow.
I can't tell you how many things I learned, I took action on. So look, when things go bad, people point fingers. I made the decision for 3 or 4 years to keep my mouth shut out of respect of the company. But I didn't plan to do that forever, because sometimes these words, it's not that they hurt me, but they hurt everybody, right? And so I think as a leader, and maybe the people on your call, like, you shouldn't be defensive, but you should know how to defend yourself, right? There's a difference. When you say defensive, it means you're not listening. It means that you have thin skin. That's not good. But being willing to take a punch and give one back, that's a good thing, right? That's a necessary thing. It's good for you. It's good for your team. It's good for your company. And again, that's just not necessarily that's what I'm trying to do with the book, but I think there's some value in telling the complete truth.
And you're a lifer, even to the point of putting it on your body. I hear this is was it a bet with your daughter? What's going on there here, Jeff?
So look, Ryan, I like tattoos. I always have.
Do you have a lot of tattoos?
I only have one.
Wait,
but
you like tattoos, but you don't really have them.
Yeah, no, look, I grew up in Finneytown. What are you going to do? I grew up in Cincinnati. So my daughter, I used to tease my daughter that I was going to go get a tattoo. And she said, Dad, you're all talk. You're all talk, no action. ever do anything. So I was at the office on a Saturday. I Googled tattoo in Danbury, Connecticut, because I wanted to be far enough away where people wouldn't recognize me. And that's kind of a blue collar town in Connecticut. So I drove there on a Saturday afternoon. I had a picture of the G logo, and then I have my daughter's initials and my wife's initials. And I said, here's what I want. Here's the colors I want. And she said, well, that's kind of a funky tattoo. And I said, yeah, I'm in a bowling league and I lost a bet. So that's my story.
So
my daughter almost passed out when I got home. She was.
Where is it?
It's on my my left hip.
Okay.
Right at the so you have to find a place that nobody can see, and won't hurt too badly, but it isn't inappropriate, right?
And you have no desire to get it taken away. You're good. You're gonna keep it.
Yeah, I joined the board of Twilio, Ryan. So
yeah,
we were having a town hall, and I was being interviewed by a young HR person, and she said, at Twilio we believe in authenticity, and so tell us something that shows your authentic self. And I just, without missing a beat, I said, I have a tattoo. And she says, no, you don't. So I stood up and I kind of, did that. And the rest is history. Right?
I love it. Jeff, I want to talk. So sales is kind of in my DNA. My dad was a lifetime sales guy, wrote books about sales. He still does it. Led 1,000-person sales forces. I've worked in it for a long time. It was my first job after getting done playing football. And so I loved reading about your kind of early stage of your career. I think the profession of selling is when done right is as noble as it gets.
Beautiful.
Can you share about your mindset and philosophy on the profession of sales?
Yeah, look, I completely agree. I think different companies treat it different ways. I think sales, when it's done right, you do two things. You have an amazing sense of urgency, right? And so you just never let a minute pass without solving a problem or getting something done. And the other one is that you're able to see your company through your customers' eyes. Mm-hmm. And the people that can do those two things can really make it happen, for their company. There's a lot of different functions in a company, but the sales force sets the culture. They create the enthusiasm and the winning spirit and all those things. So I think that's really critical. And the last thing I would say is that one of the things that made me a pretty good salesman is that I was really a pain in the ass. I was persistent. I was dogged, almost to the point of being like horrible. But I was a pain in the ass to get stuff done for my customer. And I know I always say to people, you interviewed Chambers not too long ago. And I always say to people, like, if there was one order left on earth and I could only pick one salesman to get it, it would be John Chambers. Because really? he just has the passion for it, the aptitude for it, and the intelligence for it.
I love John Chambers. Are you guys good buddies?
Yeah, we are great friends.
Well, you wrote that I learned so much from my peers, CEOs of other companies who became friends. You said there are too many to name, but when you are on top, it is easy to be long on friends. When you hit bottom, there are a select few who reach out, and one of them, you mentioned three names, and the third one was especially John Chambers. What's that relationship like?
Oh, look, I think John and I have known each other for a long time. We both have been on top and on bottom, so we know what it feels like. But he's just one of those, too infrequently, we don't go the extra mile for our friends. And the phone call out of sequence, the phone call to give support when somebody's down, that means so much. It's something I always try to do, through my career, and it's something I appreciate in others. And I just think, it's life. You live in a time like this with COVID, and you understand how little control we have over events, right? But the one thing we can always control is ourselves and how we treat situations. And so you see that in a crisis, right? You see, I would always look up, like during the financial crisis, I'd say, okay, these three people, they're awesome. that person, as soon as things calm down, I'm going to fire them because they don't know how to react when the chips are down. They're fair weather people.
I learned a lot of that from football.
Yeah,
When we were winning, everyone was the captain.
totally.
Everyone was the leader. What I really like to look at was halftime of a game. We're losing. We're getting physically beat up. And the look into the eyes of the guys around, like who's ready to
Yeah,
fight,
yeah,
who's ready to go right now. Like that's what I'm really looking for, because when you're winning, everybody's smiling and having a good time. Yeah, I'm the guy. But when we're getting literally physically beat up, we're losing, who is going to fight and come back? That's who I want around me. And that's why
totally.
our coaches were big on all these workouts leading up to our game season, because it showed who's willing to fight through the tough
Yeah.
stuff there. Did you learn that from sports as
Oh,
well?
for sure. I think
Yeah.
sports, again, there's always the next play, right?
Yep.
The play didn't work. Don't sit around and throw each other under the bus. Just
Right.
do the next play better, right? That's what you learn. I became, because I lived in New England for so long, I became a Patriots fan.
Mhm.
And I used to like to watch Belichick when the team was losing, not when they were winning. But when the team was losing, he would have his back to the field and he would be kneeling in front of the offensive line, and he was telling them exactly what he needed them to do, right?
Yep.
And so he would sit there for like 20 minutes and wouldn't even watch the game and would just be like focused on, he would sit there and say, look, I can't control the score right now. It is what it is. But if I can make these guys better the next time they go out there, that's my job. And that's what's made him such a successful coach for so long.
Yeah. I vividly remember seeing him do that all the time. He'd have the
Yeah.
little board, he'd be drawing a play, like down in the trenches coaching little details. I
Yeah.
think that's part of being a leader. I have a systems thinking question for you,
Mhm.
Jeff. You and Andy will sit and watch Netflix at times, and you like to watch, I read, murder mysteries.
Yeah.
And at times she'll turn you and say, who do you think did it? She's all excited, and you'd say, honey, you just got to let it come to you. And you talk about how leaders need to be like this from a systems thinking perspective. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, I'd give you two thoughts. One is kind of like being willing to look horizontally or look at, unobvious things and build connections. And so I think for your listeners, they need to keep their head up and stay engaged in what's going on in the world around them. And, a couple of things that I picked up clean technology before it was popular, digital innovation, but I didn't get that because I'm smarter than anybody else. I got it because I asked questions, and I would watch customers, and I would read books. And so I just think you want to be well-read, and you want to be out in the market asking questions all the time. And then the other part of it, which gets the suggestion you just made, which is, look, to get from point A to point B, it takes 20 steps, let's say. And as a team, we're on step 7. And I would say to people, I don't know what step 12 looks like yet, okay? But we're going to figure it out together. We're going to get there at the right time. We're going to keep going. And leaders have to be comfortable with uncertainty, particularly when you're driving change, particularly when it's volatile, to say, look, it's 20 steps. We're on a journey. We're going to go together. Let's trust each other. But, we don't have to have all the answers to start, because you never have all the answers to start. And that's where I get to my wife. We watch, I tell the story like, if you watch Breaking Bad, right, all 65 episodes, by the end of the 8th episode, you think Walter White is a great science teacher that has cancer. And by episode 65, he's the Antichrist, right? So you have to keep progressing in your journey as a leader.
Jeff, when you think about all of the incredible leaders you've been fortunate to be surrounded by, what have you found to be some of the common behaviors of leaders who sustain excellence?
Learning. It's just, my hero is Fred Smith from FedEx. Fred started FedEx with one plane and is still the leader today. And he's always scratching and clawing and learning and figuring out what's next. And, that's just the most important, thing is learning, digging, being curious, think about what's next. And whether it's Jeff Bezos or Tim Cook or Jamie Dimon, or I could go down the list. Belichick or Nick Saban, go to coaching. They're just curious all the time. Look at Alabama's offense today versus what it was a decade ago. Completely different, right? Yet they won a national championship in 2010. They won a national championship in 2020. So that's what I mean by being a learner.
Is that, I found curiosity at the top of the list from, I've done 400 plus of these things.
Yeah.
Is that a learned behavior, or are you born with that?
I think some of that's learned at your mother's knee, and some of it, you kind of learned the hard way because you didn't ask the right questions at the right time. But some of that's just the way you're brought up, right? Some people are just so incurious about almost everything, and it's hard to say what made them that way or how to cure them of it. But I think it's a combo.
Jeff, as you end your book, I'm not going to spoil it, but there are parts of it that I think are tough, and I felt for you as you felt some pain for some of the things that have happened to employees at GE. And I sense you have this real compassion and empathy for them, and you feel responsible for some of that. And yet when I talk to you, I sense you, at least to me, I'm feeling someone who is at peace, who seems happy, who seems grateful for what they have. Can you walk me through how you think and feel each day, knowing that some of the struggles that happened at GE and what happened to some of the employees with pensions or whatever, I think some of them got frozen, and since the stock price dipped so much, what's this dichotomy of how you think and feel on a daily basis?
Yeah, look, I think if you read the whole book, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about the company, don't feel for it, don't feel responsible. And I guess I want all your listeners to know that I tried my best. But I also want them to know that you can still progress as a human being even when you have a broken heart. And that you have to keep trying even when the efforts don't seem to be working for you. And so I wanted the story to be raw. I wanted it to feel real because that's how I feel. But I also want to say that there's some value as a human being, and just keep moving, right? Just keep learning, keep trying. Don't hide, don't disappear. And maybe there's some listeners out there that can benefit from that.
Do you have a broken heart?
Oh gosh, I really, think about something you love, people that you love, and it just didn't end the way I wanted it to, right? Yeah. And that's sad. That's infinitely sad.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to quit giving back to others. I don't want to stop my life and stop learning. And I carry those two things, I carry both of them.
Well, the book's called Hot Seat, What I Learned Leading a Great American Company. Jeff, when I'm sent these books early by teams, I do my best to be prepared, as you can tell from today. For yours, I was struggling I got it digitally. I was struggling to stop. I just kept reading and reading and reading. As I hope you can tell, you did a remarkable job. Okay. And I want to give you huge props for writing a book that is, it's almost kind of like a novel, but it's obviously not. It's a true story. So you did a really good job, and I'd encourage people to read Hot Seat, What I Learned Leading a Great American Company by Jeff Immelt. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Ryan. Great to be with you. Thanks for everything.
Love it, man. I would love to continue our dialogue. A dream set up for me one day to have a dinner when we get in person with you and John Chambers, and I can just sit and be a fly on the wall and listen to you guys talk.
That'd be great.
I hope to do that someday. I will fly wherever you need me to fly. Okay.
We could do it at Montgomery Ribs King, baby.
Tell me the time and the place, and I'll be there. All right.
Good.
Thanks so much.
Good,
All right,
Aaron.
guys. See
Thanks,
you.
Isabella.
Thanks,
See ya.
Isabella. Really appreciate it. All right.
That was great.